Who am I here with right now?
Kai Moore. I'm one of the co-founders of Wrong Organ.
Wrong Organ of mouthwashing fame, also How Fish is Made. Really, really stoked to be sitting here chatting with you. So can you kind of give me a little bit of your background and kind of how you came to become a game dev and into Wrong Organ?
My journey into game dev was pretty abrupt in some ways. I originally used to study electrical engineering at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, the middle of the cold, dark Rochester, New York. Ironic that I still ended up in a cold, dark place, I suppose, but this one's slightly better. I was there for around 8 months, and kind of around the time that I was like, this just isn't working, COVID happened. All like sent home, online classes, just terrible. So I dropped out. I was like, I don't know what I want to do, but it's definitely not this. I remember stumbling across this Unreal Engine's like asset video. I was like, oh, this looks cool. I thought it was like a game at first or something, and then I realized, oh no, these are assets you can download to make games from, and you can actually get the game engines for free. And so I started playing around with that, and kind of that moved into, you know, like Skillshare tutorial videos. I didn't honestly stick with it that long just because I know that I liked being in an educational setting. I like being able to actually ask questions about, you know, if I want to make this mechanic or I'm trying to design this thing, how is the best way to go about it? And you can't really interact with a video like that unless you're willing to, you know, go on forums or comments or pay an extra tier depending on what you're doing. I didn't want to do any of that. I wanted to go to a school and be with other people who are also learning. And Stockholm just kind of seemed like the best place for that, mostly because Google told me. I also do have family here. I was familiar with Sweden, and it felt familiar enough to not feel like pointed my hand on the globe and picked a spot, but still different enough where it wasn't like I was still in New York. Moved here maybe back in 2021, and that's when I enrolled as a designer. Very early on into that, I met Jeffrey, one of our co-founders and gameplay designer. Him, Johanna, and Martin worked on a game, How Fish is Made, back in school, and that was all the rage, especially for us who are all students. Like having any amount of recognition was stellar, and it was, you know, like Markiplier and Jacob Geller and Hideo Kojima did a tweet about it. I mean, it was insane. The energy in the classroom when we found that out was just like, it was a great time. So we knew each other back then, but we had never worked on a project together until a game that we canceled into while we were still at school called Katurka. Still kind of same aesthetic, but like a third person kind of just vertical slice of a AAA game, basically, was the point. This was before we were thinking about starting a company. We're like, this will make for a great portfolio piece. We'll get to do something cool. Jeff's a big shooter fan, so am I, so it was nice to work on a project like that. That was cool. It was a good failure because we were like a 14-person team. I was a lot to manage, and that's originally why I was brought on, because I was a designer, but I was mainly acting as a producer, especially in all of our group projects, and I grew to kind of really like that role, and they were experiencing some difficulties with managing the team while also being full-time developers. It was just too much to juggle.
I think like having a producer come out of like the trenches of development, I can just tell by your personality of like type A or like a leader. And a lot of people are super talented within game dev, but they just don't have that aspect about it. You find somebody that not only understands the design and the process, but wants to make those processes improved and expanded upon. I think that's where you would get a really, really effective producer.
Hope that I am like that. It was a good combination, as you were saying, to kind of join them and try to assist. We still obviously ended up canning the project just because we ran out of time before internships. At that point, it had been in the back of my mind to kind of start a studio, and I think with every one of the co-founders, it had always been an aspiration. So it just kind of seemed like, why not try to do this? You know, at worst, you know, we can say that we started a company and we put out a game or two or whatever it was going to be for the amount of runway we had, and then we could get other jobs and have that be like a great piece of experience on our CV. Of course, Mouthwashing came out and did well, and so now that isn't thankfully a reality.
Being somebody that had worked in AAA for a long time and then kind of have found myself in the space of super indie, like complete independent, is interesting because you always, and I feel this way too about anyone that wants to do this. So if you're listening to this and you want to start a game studio, you should, because if you fail, you always have tried, right? Trying and failing is way better in pretty much any situation than never giving it a shot. Outside of games that influence you, what are other pieces of media that influence you?
I'm not one of the kind of like creative figureheads by any means. My style doesn't come through so much as compared to like Johanna or Jeff, who are very opinionated and very kind of hands-on with kind of molding the games. They all have a better answer than me, exactly. But I'm more of a TV show guy, to be honest. Yeah, my favorite TV show, I really love Andor. Andor's phenomenal. Is it True Detective? Season 1 is a phenomenal season of television. Kind of to get back to your original question, I really like slower burn humor, storytelling. That's my favorite narratives in games, and I think I was lucky enough to kind of end up working with. Yeah, exactly. Those shows. I also, this is less influential, but I feel like I need to say it in an interview at some point. Love Vampire Diaries. I love Vampire Diaries, dude. It's such amazing, terrible TV. It's just slop. Both of those elements. Now that I say them out loud to you, like it does actually kind of fit with what we do here, surprisingly.
With mouthwashing in particular, there's this like sense of like ridiculousness that kind of goes through the whole thing, but it's like really heavy and deep, and there's like existential stuff, but also like it's goofy, right? Like it's you know, people can put it on a pedestal and say, but at the end of the day, there's like goofiness to it. Is kind of overshadowed by how serious some of it is, but that combination is super effective. Why do you think Sweden is kind of dominating the indie game scene? And when I say that, I mean 20% of revenue on Steam is coming from Sweden, with a relatively small population. Out of that 20%, repo by itself is like 3% of revenue. Why is that, in your opinion?
Maybe not the best historical knowledge. Sweden has always seemed to be very creatively focused and always had kind of big trends kind of as a population, I think, mostly speaking from my stepdad, who's Swedish. He studied advertisement. When he explained it, there was a big push in Sweden for people to kind of go into that career. I think there's a lot that kind of Sweden has going for it that kind of lends itself well. Like the government, it does a pretty decent job, depending on where you are in the country, kind of supporting and leading those initiatives. I mean, we have Dataspelbranschen in this building, so we're always somewhat connected. They kind of advocate for the games industry to the government. So there's a lot of pushes kind of in the government or systematically for game development. But I also think that it's just like, it's a cold, dark, and like depressing place. And I do think that lends itself to creativity. I mean, what else are you going to do when it's like outside and it's icy and snowing? You know, you're going to do something that's an outlet and doesn't really require a lot of space, I guess. And game dev is like that. Same with like music production. I think that's why there's so many creative industries that when you look into it, like there's a ton of Swedes.
It ends up being like a significant portion of like the top 200 worldwide comes from Sweden. And the fact that there is like a government agency that advocates for developers to the government, the American mind cannot comprehend.
No, it's exactly. It was shocking to kind of see that. And I guess one of the reasons that I wanted to study game dev in Sweden as well was just because they seem to have been doing it for so much longer. The educations are a lot more senior, I guess. At the time that I moved to Sweden, there started to be more and more games educations in the States, but I didn't really feel like being a guinea pig of like them figuring out how to teach game development.
I think one of the biggest issues I hear from people that do it academically in the United States is it's just here, you come here, there's a small population, there's a lot of game developers, there's a lot of job opportunities within like this building alone. Whereas in the United States, there's so many people interested in games, and there's so many, like, not to be rude, but like second-rate educational institutions that there's just not enough jobs for these people when they get out. And even if they're really good, are they being taught from a perspective of you're making this for yourself, or are they teaching you how to go into the workforce? And if they're teaching you how to go into the workforce, it's almost worthless because there's barely a workforce to go into. We talked a little bit about how Wrong Organ came together. Can you kind of run that down a bit more? How did it all come together?
It was, I think, in large part, yes, we making the same games. We obviously have a lot of similar taste in games kind of throughout all the founders. Maybe one of the biggest factors for myself was that Future Games, the school we attended, their premise is to bring in developers from studios to come teach a course. So you actually get some more valuable information that's pretty relevant to the industry you're going into. And not to knock those people too much, but I do think that we all, or at least I'll speak for myself here, I got the vibe very much that you're a cog in the machine. I felt like you could see that when they were talking about game development. That was really scary because I like games a lot and I like working on games and contributing how I can, and I would never want that to feel as much like work as I assumed it felt like it for them, if that makes sense. And so I was like, yeah, let's try to make this studio. If it goes hits up, it's fine. Sure. Coming off of How Fish is Made and our canceled project, we sat down and we wanted to put out a game kind of in the first 3 months. We were like, let's just hit the ground running, get our momentum starting to build up and our name out there, etc., and kind of take it from there. We have 2 years of runway from our investor, who was also in our class. We knew we had these 2 years and we're like, this is the best way to try and capitalize on that for hopeful success. A couple weeks in, Johanna had already kind of drafted drafted up, not everything, but kind of the base plot points of the game. She came with like some slides with some concept art of some of the characters and explained the tone of the narrative. The whole Twin Peaks in Space was the title of the slideshow. So it was very clear from the beginning what Mouthwashing was going to be. We're like, this seems cool. 3 months seems like we're going to hit that. It did not at all. We were, very much still getting used to scoping things correctly.
Where did you get in 3 months?
If I can recall that.
Compared to what you expected versus what happened, that's always interesting to me because it's never one-to-one.
I think we probably had like the base layout of the ship, which isn't the one that made it at all, but we had the ship, we had some systems. I think we had maybe chapter 2 where you open the cargo hold. It's a mouthwash reveal. I know that was one of the earlier chapters of the game, that was gray box. We had like the interaction system. At a systems level, mouthwashing is fairly simple outside of the Bizarro sequences. Those weren't done, obviously, but the core systems like, the player controller and talking to the characters and all that was all in. We had some finished scripts for some of the chapters, but we were not anywhere near where we needed to be. We kept kind of pushing the buck, and we got to a point where we were spreading Martin and Johanna a little too thin, because both of them, Martin does our audio predominantly, and Johanna does our narrative and art predominantly. So she's already kind of split up, and so was he. And so they were both doing art and their other task, and it was just too much. At that point, we had kind of run into almost a year in. And so we brought in 2 interns, which helped us immensely, just being able to finally allow both of them to focus on what they needed to do. The thing with Mouthwashing, I think in a lot of ways, was that narrative was always kind of the thing that took us the longest. And it's the thing that kind of makes the experience. You have to get that right. I guess as a producer, for better or for worse, have never wanted to rush that process. Like, yes, there should be deadlines and you should try to hit those because, they are important. And with Mouthwashing being such a narratively heavy thing, like the last thing I'd want to do is rush that. I think somewhere in here as well, we work on a DLC for How Fish is Made as kind of a marketing tie-in to Mouthwashing, because we knew that people knew of How Fish is Made, but they didn't know about Wrong Organ or that we were even working on a new title. So we made the last one and then another in like 3 weeks and just kind of did like a Katamari Damacy thing, had Curly in it, and that was kind of in there in the development timeline as kind of we need Johanna to kind of focus on the narrative. We can't really, implement the chapters until we get the scripts or whatever. So if she can write a couple of lines, and I say a couple, there's quite a bit, but if you write this real quick, switch things up, which also at times helps, then we can spend a bit of time making this DLC. We tried to work smartly throughout Mouthwashing in a way that, we weren't completely dragging our feet while we were waiting for Johanna to write the narrative. That was one of the key things we tried to do there. And we basically just did that up until launch. We were making last minute adjustments to the script basically until a few weeks out. It was a very long process at the end of the day. It took us maybe 18 months from our original 3 estimates.
Something interesting with Mouthwashing too, when we're talking about narrative, is sequencing for that game. How many different iterations of sequence did that go through? Because we were saying last night, it kind of cuts off in certain spots that it could have cut off like 5 minutes earlier because it's all kind of spontaneous, but you want to get to a certain narrative exposition for each one. As far as from your perspective as a producer, the sequencing aspect, did it take long to kind of figure out how you guys wanted to tell the story? Was it always nonlinear?
It was always nonlinear. When we had our base plot points, we kind of put them all onto Post-its and just kind of place them out. We just kind of played around with the sequencing of the specific points because you want it, especially when people go back and play it, you want to be able to tell that it's all, it could be told chronologically and it needs to make sense. But then of course we break it up, and so we made sure as best we could to make it make sense. And so in order to do that, we timelined things out very early on to make sure everything was logical and to just pace the game itself. We had the plot points broken into a non-chronological order, and then we went through and actually added in most of the Bizarro sequences for pacing because we were very hesitant with it being so narrative focused, and that's kind of all you do in Mouthwashing to not bore the player. We were very mindful of pacing, and for that exact reason as well. So we went in and kind of injected kind of the horror bits to make sure it still kind of kept your attention. Of course, I think the narrative does that as well. well, but we were very scared.
What are you playing in your free time right now?
I'm not proud of this answer. Jeff and I have been playing a lot of League. Sadly, I'm sorry. I enjoy multiplayer games. I'm a big kind of FPS fan, which isn't obviously League. I enjoy playing competitive games, and League is a fun one, especially when you have friends. Outside of that, though, I just played Dispatch. Really fun, really well voice acted and executed. It was a fun time. I think I'm about to start playing Disco Elysium again, just because it feels about that time. So it's snowing outside, and that usually brings my want to replay that game. Helldivers 2, also a great game. I was a fan of the original. Yeah, and how much they care about like the ballistics, some like little ballistic details in that game.
Yeah.
It goes a long way. It tickles my little tactical shooter brain.
What kind of music are you listening to?
Really just ride the wave of whatever Spotify gives me in my Discover Weekly. So a lot of the artists that I'm listening to currently, I honestly just don't know the names. Yeah. Maybe some of my favorite artists would have to be, I love D'Angelo, Kendrick Lamar, trying to think, Erykah Badu, Frank Ocean, also great. I need some sad songs. It's always the last one that trips you up.
First thing that comes to your mind.
First thing that came to my mind was like Alt J.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, they're great.
It's a good one.
Yeah. So I mean, we'll settle the list there. That's pretty good. Honorable mention for like Jelly Crystal, the indie Swedish artist here.
Do you play music at all? Are you a musician?
The only thing that I do is I kind of just play around with like some DJ equipment, just for myself. I don't have the time really to like invest learning a new instrument. I need to learn a new language before that. I do like DJing just because it kind of hits that music creation or like itch in my brain.
If you were stuck on a desert island, then you could take 3 things. What 3 things would you take with you?
Something to listen to music on, probably just like my phone and headphones, if we can count that as one unit.
I'll
allow it. It's basically just a glorified iPod. Probably bring like a Steam Deck and then like a fucking flare gun. I'm curious about how you got into publishing, just kind of in depth a little bit, and what it's like being a solo publisher.
Yeah, well, it's really hard. So I got into it. I mean, my whole career in games has been within publishing. I worked for Bethesda Softworks, which most people, when I say that, they're like, oh, you worked on like Skyrim, or it's like there's Bethesda Game Studio, and then like for the people watching this, there are game developers and game publishers, and they do different jobs, and sometimes they're really silly when they form the company and give the publisher the same name as the developer, so it gets really confusing. But anyway, I was at Bethesda for 8 or 9 years. I started in 2016 doing QA, and I was in QA for a number of years. A lot of my time in QA, I really tried to do things different than some of the ways that we were like told to, and sometimes it was taken well and sometimes not so well. But one thing that I really tried to advocate for was us having more direct communication with the developers, which I can understand why there was kind of a not doing that, because there's some of these QA teams like 50 to 60 people, and if everybody has unvetted access to the devs, nothing's gonna get done. With some level of that, there is just so much better communication, there's so much better like velocity on what you're doing. So one of my favorite things that I got to do in QA was I led a speedrunning QA team for Deathloop. And it was interesting to see, because initially it just started out like, it was COVID. So my COVID hobby was speedrunning alpha builds of Deathloop, basically, because I was they were like, well, you're gonna be a coordinator, like find a niche, like find something to do. And I'm like, well, speedrun, that sounds fun. It's an interesting game for that. We were being asked as a speedrunning team to do all kinds of stuff. By the time other teams could smoke a build, we had finished it. You know, we like, our smoke process was a front to back playthrough of the game. Undeniably valuable. We were able to platinum the game in a day. When it came to like cert tests for Sony, it was like, well, we need to know that all these trophies can unlock naturally. We were able to do that because we had people that just grinded this and just knew what to do. Eventually, when we were acquired by Microsoft, we started to have new standards for photosensitivity. We basically would run gameplay footage through a program that would show if it was triggering to people that have some kind of like epilepsy. And the big catch with that is you need the entire game worth of footage to put through. So guess who? You're doing this for the entire department. You know, you're applying this method. And that was really cool. That was a really proud moment for me, because it feels like helping an accessibility standard. Eventually, I moved into publishing production. In a AAA sense, was a lot of liaison between the developers and all the other aspects of publishing, QA, marketing, PR, customer service. I worked with Arcane Austin very closely for a couple of years. Eventually, after that, and I was moved to working with Machine Games, which brought me to Sweden at some point, and it's kind of where I kept saying, the last time I was here, I kept saying, man, they really got it figured out. Life is like figured out here. Since then, I did a lot of, again, I was publishing production for that. I did a lot of the liaison between not just publishing the developers, but in this case, there was a third entity because it was a licensed IP, we had Lucasfilm. So every piece of Indiana Jones had to go through submission process for approvals by everyone. There's a lot of negotiations that have to happen with stuff like that. Some for the better, some maybe not so much. Part of my job on there was like, they need to see every environment. So I would get into id Tech and like run console commands and do like pretty pro level like game capture, where I just like no clip and like fly slowly through levels, have to like map out the levels so I know I get like every part of it. And that was a hefty chunk of my time on that project, was doing that kind of stuff. Arduous to say the least. But again, at the end of the day, it came out and it was good. And around July, they made cuts to several layers of management, as they said, and I was made redundant. Since I had been there for a while, I had a decent amount of severance. I gotta say, if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be doing this because I had a runway. I've had this idea, it's like since COVID. I had been fantasizing really about doing my own thing for years at this point, since like 2020. I even had the name. No Quarter as a name that has existed since for like 5 or 6 years at this point. So I knew exactly what I wanted to do, or like the identity, and a couple other factors of life just kind of mixed in together. And around September, I filed the LLC and kind of decided not necessarily going to develop games, although I would love to work with a team on developing a game at some point, more internally, because I'm a solo entity. That's not like an out of the question thing. I think that is really like a point of value with this for some. Obviously, like if you're coming to me wanting me to fund your $1 million game, that's not going to happen. If you come to me with like, a smaller budget that I could feasibly like help with, sure. But most of what I do is like marketing, PR, trying to make your game rise above this sea of other games for some reason and get it attention, and also foster what you're doing, give qualitative feedback, act as like a backstop for quality for what I'm doing. I'm not naive to the fact that a solo publisher cannot really provide a comprehensive publishing service for if you want to do all your consoles and things like that, but like it's pretty manageable with just Steam. The agility that I can act as a single person is invaluable for some. Months in and able to like support myself and my family with what I'm doing, and I love it. I really don't want to do anything else. I get to dress up like this. Mouthwashing was my favorite game of the year, 2024. It had a profound effect on how I look at games as like a medium of art, and not to just gas you up. This is truth. I've said this to people that aren't the dev team.
And so is this a part of the like publisher brand?
Yeah, it is. So I do No Quarter Direct, which is a funny version of like a Sony Direct or a Nintendo Direct, where it's like I'm just showing stuff from the company, like game trailers, announcements, and I think Critical Reflex does something. Like that was actually what really inspired me to. I was like, oh, this is a cool format, because I'd only ever seen it from like a AAA level, and then it's like, well, this like indie level, like let's take it even a step lower. Smash or pass, Mrs. Puff from SpongeBob.
I think that's a pass for me. Have you asked everyone this?
I should have. It's been really good chatting with you.
Yeah, man.
Up to anything. Wrong Organ is not currently working on something new right in front of me right now.
We obviously are, as you could see. We're doing something pretty different, at least in some ways, mostly because as our now small group of 8 on the development side of things, we've kind of found a style that we like art-wise. Like we love this kind of PSX-y kind of take that we have. We obviously like the kind of weird horror and like our narrative tones, the atmosphere, like all of that. Obviously, we love the narrative stuff too, but we also just don't want to do that for a third time, at least in the sense of like as intensely as How Fish Is Made and Mouthwashing have been. And so we want to show that we also like to make more gameplay intensive experiences that obviously still have, the narrative elements that we want to get through in those experiences. But that is kind of our big push for this next project, is to show that off just on the dev side of things when it comes to like internal playtest. Like Mouthwashing, playing that
it's a
game.
hard one to do over and over again, right?
Exactly. It's just like, okay, here we go. Talk to Anya, and you just have to sit through it and kind of make sure everything works as intended. But that's not as fun as working on something that's more gameplay intensive, where it kind of has that kind of emergent gameplay, because it actually there is a game.
The best kinds of games, to me, it's something that has the narrative is great, and it can only be conveyed through an interactive experience. Like something you have to do as opposed to watch.
With this game being as gameplay intensive as it is, and with Mouthwashing being as story intensive as it is, like we really want to kind of merge both of those things together at a later point. I mean, as a studio, we never want to grow super big. So for us, there is kind of the more realistic aspect of like, okay, well, then you need lots of money if you want to go after a project of that size. And then, you know, with the team size that you have. And so this isn't going to be, you know, like our Death Stranding or anything like that. But it's our step towards doing kind of, I think, what we ultimately all want to do, which is kind of
awesome.
Both of those things together.
I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it as well.
I'm gonna say we good.